So if you're new to Mac, especially if you bought the new MacBook Neo, I'm going to go through how you can easily learn Mac OS, especially if you come from Windows. I'm going to explain to you how to make it like Windows and how to get started and everything. So first of all, the first thing you're going to see at the bottom is the dock. Now this dock is like the start menu. This is like all your applications on Windows. You can basically click on application and then you will open it like so. And when you join for the first time, you'll get some prompts. When you open an app, as you can see on the top left, in Windows, you have the top right. On Mac, you have it on the top left. You have the close button, you have the expand button to make it into full size mode. And if you ever want to bring that up, you just scroll your mouse to the top. And then you have the minimize equivalent, and you can see it goes to the right hand side over here. And then you have the option to close application. Now we're going to go over that a bit later on. I wanted to first start with the general space. So this is the desktop, okay? Now, one thing you're going to realize is you have this dock. This is all your applications that are installed. This is like your quick start guide. On the top left, you have, this is effectively kind of like a permanent window that goes. So if I open, for example, notes, and you can see, for example, this always stays to the top. This is where you can have your file. So if you want to create a new folder or a new note, every application that you open, this taskbar changes relative to the application. So let's say, for example, you wanted to go undo. You know, sometimes in Microsoft Word, for example, you might have undo within the app. Most of it would be here. So if you ever try and look at undo, or you want to change the settings, or you want to view something, most of it will be on the top. You can see it says notes. When I close notes, and I click on the desktop, it then shows Finder. What Finder is basically like the Explorer on Windows. So now when you open like an Explorer, that is basically what Finder is. Now, the first thing I'll suggest is go to Finder, go to Settings, and then I want you to turn on hard disks. Now you can see when you do that, just close this like so. Now you see it says Macintosh HD. This is basically like My Computer. So if you double click on this, you have the My Computer equivalent. So of course you have on the left-hand side, you've got your documents, you've got the desktop, you've got your downloads folder, all very simple. And you got, for example, like here, Macintosh HD, and you have your file path. This is basically like where your System32, your program files all are as well. So that is like one of the biggest things, the easiest things you can do to get used to Windows when you go from Windows to Mac, should I say. Then on the right-hand side, you kind of have the notifications. So on the top right, you have the notifications. You also have the time and date. You then have the control panel. So if you have an iPhone, you may have sometimes scrolled up or scrolled down, and you can have your quick access to your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth. This is like clicking on the bottom right on Windows. And you've got your display. You can turn your brightness up and down. Same with the sound. And you can edit these if you want to. We then have the spotlight. So this is equivalent of the search bar. So on the bottom left on Windows, you can search for something. So there's two ways you can do it. You can either click on the magnifying glass over here, or if you want, you can press Command plus space bar and you can search for something. So let's say you wanted to search for an application. Let's say, for example, I wanted to search for contacts. I can literally just press Enter, click on it, and it will then open up like so. So you can either do it here, or you can press Command and space, and this will be the shortcut. And then these are sometimes recent applications. So currently right now I'm recording the screen, and that's why you can see OBS Studio open, but just ignore that. And that will be it. So that is a general overview of what you see on your screen. Now, on the bottom left on the dock, you have the Finder. The Finder is the same thing as Macintosh HD. So it's like basically like going My Computer or File Explorer. That's the equivalent, so File Explorer. Apps just has a list of every single app you have. So some of the apps, for example, like chess, it might not be on the dock below. So dock is like, your quick start menu, as I mentioned. You can, of course, drag an app if you want to on the dock. And that way you can add something like, for example, chess. And it's like kind of like on the Windows on the bottom left, you're pinning something to the taskbar. If you want to remove something from the taskbar, you just drag it away simply like that. Sometimes it doesn't work. You have to just drag it to the right-hand side to this bin, and it says remove from dock. These are a list of all your applications. So yeah, just to give you the main ones, Safari is like the internet. You have mail, you have messages, maps, photos, FaceTime, phone, contacts, notes, Apple TV, music, and so on. Then this one is system settings. So, normally on Windows, you have a list of all your settings on your computer. these are all the settings. So if you ever want to change something to do with Bluetooth, general, you want to do a software update, you're not sure where to go, most of the stuff you will find over here. Now, when you scroll up and down, if you do connect a mouse, one thing you'll find a bit weird is that the scroll wheel is the opposite direction. But everything that you want, so all the settings that you would need to find will all be here. You know, your mouse, your keyboard, if you want to change your sensitivity, everything is here. So this settings is really, really important. So you can also search for settings. Remember that command plus space. You can also search for system settings. Then on the right hand side, this is basically apps that are open. So you can see if I click on notes and I open up, and let's just say I minimize it, you can see it goes over here to the right hand side. You see it says notes, and that means that's the application it's open. So if I open something, let's say I open Apple Music as an example, and then if I minimize that, let's just skip through this, not now, please, thank you. And I minimize this. So as you can see, all the apps that are currently open are on this bottom right hand side. Now, what's important to note is, this is so important. When you press the close button, it doesn't actually close the application like on Windows. It just kind of pushes it, or basically the equivalent is it minimizes it. So you can see if I press minimize here, or if I press on notes, if I press close, it's still open. So the way you want to close an application is, you see these little white dots. So you can see below notes is little white dots. So every time I open application, let's say I open contacts, have a look. There's a white dot below contacts. Now to quit an application, you just want to right click on the application and you just press quit. Simple as that. Right click and you press quit. And that way it won't, that's basically effectively closing down an application and terminate the application. Sometimes if your application freezes and it doesn't want to quit, one tip I would give you is, if you right click on music, for example, and then you hold down the option key, you will get this. When you hold down the option key after you right clicked, you will get this idea of force quit. So let's say, for example, like a task manager equivalent, you might want to end the task or end the process. Literally hold down the option button and then it'll say force quit. So if an application doesn't respond or it freezes in the future, you can then press force quit. So that is basically the whole general idea of how the operating system is. Now, let's go over a few things. So let's talk about, let's say Safari. Let's say we want to install a program. So you can see Safari still open. Safari is, for example, your internet browser. Some of you may prefer Google Chrome. So let's go over here to google.com and we want to download Google Chrome. I'm going to press enter. And normally when you go to Google Chrome, when you load it on a Mac, it will know that you're on a Mac. So you can see it says download Chrome for Mac OS 12 or later. Of course, Windows files won't work on Mac. It's a complete different operating system. So Mac has its own operating system. And to install a file gets a bit finicky, but once you get the hang of it, it's so simple. So we're going to press download Chrome, okay? So you can see we're going to download it. We're going to say, do you want to allow? Just press allow. And you can see a little animation. And you can see on the bottom right, that's where the downloads are. So this would be a list of all my downloads. I can then X out of this to close Chrome. You can also go, as I said, you can click on the Macintosh HD, and you can also go downloads over here. Now you can see Google Chrome.dmg file. Don't worry, this is not a virus. A DMG file is basically like an installer for Mac. So if I right click on this and then I press get information, you can see all the information and where is it from, the file extension, and so on. I'm going to close this. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to right click on Macintosh HD. I'm just going to press get information. So if you ever want to see how much storage you have, you can right click on this and then it can tell you, for example, I have available 194 gigabytes in total. Just a quick tip. But anyway, going back to downloads, we're going to go back to downloads and you can see on the bottom right, the file is there. We're going to close this notes because we don't need this anymore. So you can see Google Chrome.dmg. Now what we're going to do is to install it. It's kind of similar to Windows, but there's a few extra steps. So first of all, we're going to double click it. Okay. So when you double click it, you're going to see something that prompts up on the right hand side. So this on the right hand side is just, it just shows Google Chrome. This is basically, it's like a virtual disk. This is showing that you currently have a DMG file open. And if I click on this, it will normally take you to this. Now, unlike Windows where you have to go through a wizard and you have to go through a setup, This is so simple. All you do is you drag Google Chrome to the applications folder. So do you remember earlier on, there was applications folder? So you can see apps like so. That's a list of all your applications. So when you open this, you literally just drag and drop Google Chrome into this. And you can see it would drag and drop it. And you can see, look here, Google Chrome is copying Google Chrome to applications. And that is how you install an app. It is that easy. And then you wait for it to finish. And just like Windows, you can see we've got Google Chrome. Once you then close this. And then what we can do is we could right click on this. We can press eject. As I said, it's kind of like a virtual disk. So think of it like it's like plugging a USB into your computer. So we're going to eject it. That's the installer. We don't need to install anymore because we've already installed the application. So we're going to drag this to the bottom right to the bin. So the bin is basically the equivalent of a recycle bin. So for example, like here, I can also right click and I can press move to bin as well. So you can drag it or you can right click. Same thing, you can empty the bin like you'd empty the recycle bin on Windows, and that is it. Now you can see if you want to then, let's say we closed applications, if you want to search for Google Chrome, you can go to the spotlight, you can search for Chrome again, you click on the top right here, you can search for Chrome like so, or you can go into the applications and you can see I can click on Chrome and that's it. You can see in the bottom right, Chrome is loading. It's asking you, do you want to open it? Are you sure? Bit of a security, and that is it. Google Chrome is open and you can set up Google Chrome. Now, what if I wanted to put it on my dock? So let's say, for example, like here, I don't really want to use Safari, let's say. I want to put Chrome on my dock. So what you would do is you go into applications and then literally you just see Google Chrome, you'll just drag it like so. Drag it to the dock. And that is simple as that. Literally as simple as that. And now I have it on my dock, so I can quit the application and it will always stay there. And of course, if I want to, I can just drag and drop it. I can move it around or do whatever I want. The question is, how do you delete an application? Now, people sometimes what they try to do is, for example, let's say Chrome, let's say we're going to put it back in the dock just for a second here. What people do is they drag it to the bottom right. That just removes it from the dock. That doesn't delete the application. The way you want to delete application is first you want to close it completely. Then what you want to do is you want to go to applications, and most of the time if you open it and you can see these three dots, you can see a list if you want, or you can go for the grid. And then what you want to do is you want to drag and drop it into the recycle bin. Now sometimes this doesn't work and it might be because the application is open. What you can do, for example, here, if you open the Macintosh HD, then you go to applications and you can find it and you can drag and drop it over here and you can see I put it in the bin. And you can see this time it's actually moved to the bin, and I can just basically here just empty it as you empty your recycle bin, and that's it. So sometimes if you open the applications folder from here, it doesn't really work. So sometimes you have to go into Macintosh HD, then go to applications and you can delete it. And you can delete almost everything, but certain things like you can't delete, for example, like you can't delete the App Store. You can, and certain things like, you can try to delete it, it just won't work. Certain native apps that are native to Mac, you just can't delete. So like, Mail, for example, and stuff like that. So those are some applications that you can't delete. Now we're just going to run over a few things that I wanted to mention. We're going to search for terminal. This is basically the command prompt equivalent. So something just to bear in mind. So you can search for terminal. This is similar to a command prompt. The next thing we want to search for is activity monitor. So think about when you press Control Delete, sometimes you might want to see your CPU usage or how much memory you're using. So for example, I'm doing this on a MacBook Neo, and you can see I'm currently using 6 GB of memory. That's because I'm recording an OBS and I've got a few things open. So here you can see a lot of things, what's using your CPU and so on. And you can see your network as well, how much packets in and out, how much data you're receiving, and so on. Now, if you want, let's say you've got multiple applications open. Let's say we've got contacts open. Let's say we open a few things and photos, okay? And let's say, for example, the computer's freezing. On the top left, the Apple will always be there. This is not the start menu. You can go to About This Mac. That would just tell you about the Mac, how much memory you have, what's the serial number. So if you ever need to find a serial number, let's say you're ringing up Apple Care, that's the way that you find it. But you can see there's force quit, and this is basically kind of like before. So instead of right clicking individually and then press an option button and pressing force quit, you can literally do it from here. So you can say I could force quit notes, I can force quit contacts, calendar. So this is basically like the task bar or Control Alt Delete equivalent. And you can see and close photos like so. And that is basically the general rundown of how to use the Mac. I think once you understand these steps, you can basically navigate very easily. You can still right click like you can in Windows. If you want to move things to a desktop, you can do so. If you want, you can do stuff like that. You might want, if you want to create a new file, you just right click and you press a new folder, and I can name this folder, for example, I press rename and I can name it, for example, videos. So I'm going to rename it here and let's call it videos. Like so. You can drag it wherever you want to. You can right click. You can change the wallpaper here. You can edit the widgets. So if you want more widgets, if you don't want the widgets at all, you can just close them. Let's say you want to add the stocks. You want to see what S&P is doing. Very, very simple. And you can press clean up and it kind of adjusts it. You can sort by, for example, name, and it will sort by name. There's multiple files. Then you can see again your Finder. You can again select here. If you click on the desktop, as I said, this changes depending what app you're on. So you can see new folder, I can undo, I can view, I can go, for example, to my computer straight away. It's kind of like a quick start menu like that. Then you have help as well. So if you're ever unsure, let's say you're ever unsure, just go on help and then tips for your Mac. I would highly recommend going through this. It is a bit tedious, but I would say especially welcome to your Mac. Although I've kind of shown you everything, these kind of go in more detail. So you can see user guides for like certain applications and so on. So definitely go to help, and then you can see a Mac user guide. So if you ever need more information, let's say you're unsure, you can go into the Mac user guide, and this will kind of go into a bit more detail, explaining what each thing does. And you can see, for example, like translate messages to calls, and it will go everything in detail. But I think in this video, we've already gone through the general gist. You might want to know some things like display settings. So you can always search it. So let's say you're always unsure, you can always search it. But most of it is going to be in your settings, like system settings and so on. Whatever you need to change here. If you want to personalize, battery, network, all that stuff will always be the same. Now, one final thing is App Store. So some applications you'll have to download from the App Store. So almost like iPhone, you have your updates for your apps, and you can see, I can then go to the arcade and I can then, for example, get an application. You'll have to create an Apple account. Although, so even if you have the free ones, you'll have to create an Apple account, but you can also download, just like on iPhone, stuff from the App Store. Like so, but you can see it asks you to create an Apple ID. So make sure you do that. You can also create an Apple ID here, or you can do that in settings as well. I think that's everything in detail. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more content like this, because I go over reviews and other Mac OS guides. And of course, the top left, that's like pressing a start menu. You then have the sleep, the restart, the shutdown, the lock screen. Everything is all there. So I think from now, remember, if you're ever unsure, even if you open an app like Notes, for example, you can just press help and you can see Notes help. So the good thing with Mac is they explain everything in detail. They'll show you some pictures and they will not only depict it to you, but they'll also give you a description of how to do it as well. So this is the best way of learning. But honestly, once you have these things all down, it's so simple. And if you want to change the display, the wallpaper, all those can be done in the settings. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. And of course, I'll catch you next time.